That night, no one knew who she was. An ordinary dress, a silent stance, a crumpled invitation in her hand. And among hundreds of people, a teacher standing alone. They mocked her. They spilled wine on her. They tried to throw her out of the room. But no one knew who she was. Until the man who stepped into the room, with a single sentence, knocked everyone's masks down. "This woman is my wife." And that night, it wasn't diamonds that shone on stage. It was a stained linen dress. Because some victories are lived in silence. But their echo is powerful enough to change the world. If you want to see what true strength looks like, watch this story to the end. No one said hello to her that night. Those who made eye contact quickly turned their heads, and those talking behind her couldn't hold back their laughter. But what hurt the most was the silence. It was a silence sharper than a slap to the face. Emma stood there at the door, holding a crumpled envelope. It didn't have her handwriting on it, but it had fingerprints because she'd opened it over and over, reading it again and again, memorizing every line to make sure there was no mistake. Women walking on the red carpet sparkled in glittering dresses. Men strutted around in tuxedos full of arrogance, their crystal glasses clinking in their hands, and lights cascaded down from chandeliers like waterfalls. Emma's shoes were flat, with a nearly faded stain on the toe. Her cream-colored dress came from a boutique, too plain, but something she thought suited her. Her hair was in a simple bun, and there was no makeup on her face, just lip balm. She didn't wear any jewelry. Her arrival was quiet, and her presence almost invisible. But she was there for a reason. For the children. For her students. She had donated the money she saved over months to a foundation, not wanting anyone to know. And she didn't even understand why she had been invited. Maybe it was just out of politeness. But the letter she held was official, and it was heartfelt. She was being thanked for her contributions. That letter was the only thing that brought her to that door. But the people inside didn't believe in that envelope. The woman standing in front of the door looked Emma up and down. Dressed in a tight black outfit, she was as cold as an ice cube. "This is for registered guests only," she said. "You might be looking for the kitchen area." She opened her tablet, glanced at the list of names, and shook her head. "Emma R. is not on the list." Emma took a step forward, her voice gentle. "I received a letter. This one I'm holding." She extended the letter, but the woman waved her hand without even bothering to read it. "A handwritten invitation? Please, ma'am. This place works with a digital registration system. We can't waste time on these old-fashioned methods." Whispers rose from a nearby table. A woman in a glittering dress leaned toward the man next to her and whispered, "Is that really linen she's wearing?" The man laughed mockingly. "Looks like something from the supermarket." Someone else added, "Someone get this woman some real shoes." The crowd started laughing. Phone cameras secretly went up. Emma clutched the letter tighter. Then someone stepped forward. A woman in an emerald green dress, looking like a familiar influencer. Her eyes scanned Emma from head to toe, and with a fake smile, she approached. "Sweetie," she said, her voice as sweet as honey but the words poisoned. "It's pretty clear you don't belong here. Good intentions alone don't get you into places like this." She turned to face the crowd, her voice rising. "This is a charity gala, not a flea market. Can someone get her out of here?" And then, as if bumping into one of the waiters, a tray of appetizers and sauces spilled all over Emma's dress. The crowd erupted in applause. "What a coincidence," the woman said. "It suits you so well." Emma's heart sank. She didn't try to clean the sauce off. She kept her head high, her eyes fixed on the chandelier lights. They were talking, laughing, but she stayed silent. And that silence was louder than their noise. At that moment, 2 security guards appeared. One adjusted his jacket. The other had a look of disdain on his face. "Ma'am, we've been informed you are not on the guest list. We'll need to escort you out." One of them lightly touched her arm, and the other whispered, "You've embarrassed yourself enough." The crowd cheered. Some shouted, "Get her out." Someone threw a napkin. Emma didn't bend down. She didn't bend down, but her heart ached. She thought only of her students. Mia, who was learning to read and write. Kevin, who had no shoes. She was here for them, to give them hope. But now, she was being humiliated in front of everyone. And then, a voice rang out, deep, firm, and cutting through all the noise in the room. "Wait a second." The crowd fell silent. Glasses hung in the air. Even the security guards pulled their hands back. The voice came from the other side of the room, and anyone who knew that voice understood at that moment. Things were about to change. "Wait a second," a voice said, with a sharpness like dark steel. The crowd immediately realized the voice was familiar, but it came from an unusual place. It was someone everyone had heard of, but whose face they had barely seen. The man walking through that door would shake not just Emma's, but the whole room's balance. As he walked toward them, his footsteps echoed on the marble floor. He was wearing a black suit, tailored just for him. His hair was neatly combed back, his face wrinkle-free, but there was a seriousness that came with years of experience. The whispers in the crowd died down instantly, because the man walking toward Emma was Daniel Hawk, a near-mystical figure in the world of finance and technology. A man who rarely appeared in the media, turned down gala invitations, and whose every move made headlines, but who never felt the need to show himself. But tonight he was here, and he was walking straight toward Emma. The security guards took a step back, a brief wave of panic passing through their silent eye contact. When Emma turned her head, Daniel's eyes were locked on hers. There was no anger on his face, but his gaze was so clear and steady that no one could doubt his seriousness. "Keep your hands off my wife," Daniel said, his voice now quieter but sharper. One of the security guards involuntarily stepped back, and the other bowed his head. "No one has the right to touch this woman." A few people in the crowd flinched. His wife? The cameras silently rose again. The mocking stares had now turned into curiosity. People began to shift, whispers started again. Emma's once ridiculed linen dress now sparkled in a new light. Daniel reached Emma's side and gently took her hand. Firmly, decisively. "I'm proud of you," he said in a tone only she could hear. The glistening in Emma's eyes wasn't anger, but a deep acceptance. Not of him, or of what had happened, but of herself. Daniel then turned to the crowd. His voice rose again, but without shouting. "This was a charity gala for children, right?" he said. "And you were about to throw out a teacher just because she didn't have expensive jewelry." His words echoed through the room, and the woman who had spilled sauce on Emma's dress slowly took a step back. In her emerald green dress, she now wore not grandeur, but shame. This woman, Vanessa Klein, whose company was an important part of Daniel Hawk's investment portfolio, knew exactly what had just happened. Avoiding eye contact, she tried to turn away. Daniel continued, "My wife, Emma, is a teacher. Every day, she tries to bring hope to dozens of children. The only reason she's here tonight is that she donated all her savings to schools in need. Yet you laughed at her shoes, her dress, her hairstyle. But real donations aren't made with bank accounts. They're made with hearts." There was another silence. But this time, it was different. It wasn't angry, cold, or condescending. It was the silence of realization, of awareness. Daniel turned to Emma and pointed to one of the most elegant tables in the middle of the room. "This is our place. Let me make sure tonight goes the way it's supposed to." Emma held her head high. The stain on her dress was still there, but the wound inside her now seemed smaller. The invitation paper in her hand was crumpled, but every line written on that letter now held more meaning. Because she wasn't just a guest. That night, even with her silence, she had silenced the whole crowd. And the gala continued. But it was no longer the same gala. As the night wore on, the atmosphere in the room completely changed. The glasses were still clinking, the music still playing, but no real laughter came from anyone anymore. Those who had turned their noses up at Emma earlier now lowered their heads when they turned back to their tables, avoiding eye contact. Silence now walked through the room, not to mock, but as the echo of shame. As Emma walked beside Daniel, everyone quietly stepped aside. Just a few minutes ago, people had told her, "This isn't your place." Now, those same mouths were silent. As they made their way through the crowd, every glance that once tried to humiliate her now looked at her in admiration. But Emma wasn't looking back. She didn't look anyone in the eye, didn't bow her head in front of anyone. She simply walked. Her simple dress was stained, a strand of hair had fallen out of place, but she stood stronger than anyone in that room. Daniel approached the table at the center of the gala and pulled out the chair for Emma. This wasn't just a polite gesture. It was a public declaration. This is her place, not yours. As Emma sat down, the chair seemed to rise like a throne in the eyes of everyone. The crumpled piece of paper in her hand was no longer just an invitation, but a mirror reflecting the hypocrisy of everyone in that room. Vanessa Klein sat in the far corner of the room. Her smile had vanished, and her makeup seemed to fade. It was as if the lights themselves had turned away from her. The man beside her, a business partner, or just someone standing next to her for appearances, quietly pushed his chair back. Vanessa had suddenly become the most recognizable, yet the least wanted face in the room. She avoided making eye contact with Emma. At that moment, she understood that everything had changed. And this change came, not with noise, but with silence. That night, it wasn't just the violins that took the stage. Another name, quieter but deeper, stepped forward: respect. Some of the guests still couldn't fully grasp what had just happened. Some were still asking themselves, how did we become so thoughtless? But one person walked through the crowd toward Emma. Her name was Clara. She was part of the night's organizing committee and was wearing an elegant but simple dress. There was a genuine regret on her face. When she reached Emma's table, her hands were slightly trembling. "Mrs. Hawk," she said slowly, loud enough to be heard but humble. "I've just learned about your donation. Honestly, only a person with a truly full heart can make such a sacrifice. I'm honored to meet you." Emma slightly nodded her head. "I was just there for the kids," she said. "Nothing else matters." Clara lowered her head for a moment, trying to hide her tears. "Tonight, we'd like to honor you on stage. Even though we won't say your name, your contribution, your heart. Everyone should know." Emma thought for a moment. Her fingers were still holding onto the old letter. Her eyes scanned the room. The people who had mocked her earlier were now whispering about her, but this time there was no scorn in their words. A transformation was happening, and she was the architect of it. She turned her head toward Clara. "Not my name," she said, "but you can mention the children's names. I'm not the one who should be on stage tonight. They should." Clara nodded. "Of course," she said, with a trembling smile. At that moment, Daniel took Emma's hand. She wasn't expecting any thanks or praise. Her reward was simply being there. In the truth, without a mask, without decorations, just plain. And the gala continued. But now, everyone was watching something else. How a teacher, a person, a woman, grew larger than life with her silence. As the night progressed, the atmosphere in the room shifted to an entirely different dimension. The corners that were once filled with laughter and mocking whispers were now silent. Emma's name had never been mentioned, but everyone was talking about her. Because Emma was no longer just an ordinary woman judged by her appearance, she had become the conscience of the room. And this had rewritten the rulebook of the gala night. When Clara took the stage, her eyes were full of tears, but her voice was clear. "Tonight," she said, "a donation was made. This donation wasn't from a company, a brand, or a wealthy heir. It came from someone who leads an ordinary life, who teaches children how to read and write, and who sacrificed their own life to give others hope." The room was silent. Everyone held their breath. That person didn't want their name revealed. But we know, their heart is here. The applause didn't come right away. Because before you can applaud, you first have to feel shame. And that shame was visible on the faces of many guests in the room. At first, they tried not to make eye contact. Then, someone, with a reluctant clap, started the applause. Then a few others joined in. And soon, the room was filled with heavy, thoughtful applause. Emma didn't lift her head. She just smiled softly. Daniel, sitting beside her, was silently celebrating her victory with his eyes. Because he knew, this woman, this simple person, had done what no one else could say that night. She had reminded them of their humanity. But the night didn't mean the same thing to everyone. At the other end of the room, Vanessa Klein's fingers nervously twitched around the rim of her wine glass. Her face was now covered, not with makeup, but with tension. The way people avoided her gaze spoke volumes. The business partners sitting beside her were absorbed in their phones, but on their screens, it wasn't just the news, it was the declining charts of company stocks. Because Daniel Hawk's quiet words, "This is my wife," weren't just a claim, they were a message. And that message had already reverberated throughout the business world. Vanessa's company, which was the official sponsor of the gala, was featured on the event posters. But in the new edition of the program booklets, her name had been erased. Her seat at the protocol table was now empty. And just outside the room, a frantic meeting had started in the backstage. Sponsorship deals were being canceled, media interviews were being postponed. The panic on Vanessa's face was transforming into a raw, maskless reality. A journalist tried to catch her. "How do you evaluate what happened tonight?" he asked, but Vanessa didn't answer. She simply walked away quickly. For her, This gala had turned from a social victory to a public execution night. Inside, Emma turned her head to Daniel and whispered softly, "We can leave if you want." Daniel held her hand and shook his head. "No, you came here, and you need to stay. They need to see you now." Emma nodded with a sincere smile. "All right," she said, "but this isn't about revenge. I don't want to be remembered for that," Daniel answered, looking into her eyes without averting his gaze. "Your name will be remembered, not for revenge, but for grace." And just then, an announcer came on stage. Holding the microphone, he spoke in a tone different from the usual luxurious gala excitement. Tonight, it wasn't about showmanship, it was about the heart speaking. And the voice of that heart has changed something in all of us. The weight in the room no longer came from Emma's silence, but from the awareness waking up in everyone. Outside, the wind was still blowing, and the night's sparkle continued. But for everyone inside, that night, the source of the light was clear. It came from a dress without design, cheap shoes, but from a woman standing tall. By the time the morning arrived, the events of the gala night were no longer confined to just the people in the room. With the first light of day, they began to shine on phone screens. A stain on a dress, a woman's stance, a man's words. They had all turned into images, headlines, and posts. The hashtag #EmmaGrace, though her name was never mentioned, began trending. A photo was shared, a woman in a stained linen dress, walking with her head held high, and a man holding her hand tightly. It was shared thousands of times. Comments like, "True nobility is hidden in silence. That woman is all of us. Even those without class have class," started spreading quickly. A journalist, after watching the events unfold, wrote, "A gala can show not who people are, but who they are not." Tonight, expensive watches stopped ticking and a linen dress spoke. That morning, TV channels began asking who Emma was. But no one really knew. Because Emma, at the end of the gala night, hadn't given any interviews. Maybe she hadn't avoided the cameras, but she hadn't spoken to them either. Her silence was more powerful than any news broadcast. Meanwhile, Vanessa Klein's phone wouldn't stop ringing. But the callers were no longer magazines seeking interviews or event organizers. They were the brands that were canceling their advertising contracts. Before the night was over, the luxury cosmetics brand announced it had ended its deal with her. By the morning, Vanessa's social media accounts had removed all sponsored content. And the comments section echoed with lines like, "Does the woman who spilled wine on her still have sponsors?" There was no one more exposed than you next to that linen dress. Who wore true elegance that night? We all saw. As Vanessa's PR team scrambled to manage the crisis, some newspapers published a photo in the morning edition. The moment Emma walked out of the hall, Daniel handing her a small sunflower bouquet. The yellow petals glowed like a challenge to the night. But Emma was at home that morning, in a quiet, small apartment full of books. She had placed the sunflowers in water, brewed her tea, and started preparing her lesson plans. Because life wasn't just about the gala night for her. Her true stage was the small classroom at the school. When she returned to school that afternoon, her students greeted her like a circle around her. They had small drawings in their hands. Mia had drawn stars and said, "This is for you, teacher." Kevin had written this note in his notebook. "You are the most beautiful because you are always here." Amid their hugs, Emma realized she was in a ceremony stronger than any from the gala night. There were no applause, just embraces. No praises, just thanks. There were no photos, but the mark of that moment was far deeper. Daniel stopped by the classroom in the afternoon. He was holding a box. Inside was the same linen dress Emma had worn at the gala, but this time it was hand-stitched, the same simplicity, but spotless and clean. "I had this specially made," Daniel said, "because everyone saw what you did in that dress. But I wanted you to wear it just for yourself this time." Emma touched the dress. It was light, so light that it carried not shame, but only honor. "Thank you," she said, "but it wasn't necessary. My fight is over." Daniel approached her. "No," he said softly. "You didn't fight. You simply stood still." And people collided with their own lies. That night, Emma again didn't post anything on social media. She didn't speak to the press. But thousands of people continued to talk about that nameless woman. The gala organizing committee issued a formal apology. "We need to learn to look at value, not appearance," they said. But for Emma, the real victory was hidden in the eyes of her students. Those looks would never make the headlines. but they would never be erased. Only 1 week had passed since the gala night, but its impact had become the first step in a series of changes that would last for months. Emma's silence that night had led to millions of people speaking, and ironically, the person who was heard the most was the woman who hadn't spoken a single word. News sites, columns, television programs. Everyone was showing the same images. Emma walking through the room in her stained dress. Daniel saying, "This is my wife." The security guards freezing, the collapse of the crowd. But no media outlet had captured her voice, because Emma had chosen to remain silent at the center of the storm. And maybe that's why the echo of her silence lasted longer. One day, as Emma was leaving school, a television reporter approached her. "Just one sentence, Mrs. Hawke. What did you feel that night?" Emma stopped, looked, and smiled. "I didn't feel anything," she said simply. "I was just who I am." And she kept walking. But that wasn't the whole story. This was the story of a woman who stood with grace when they tried to humiliate her, yes. But it was also the story of a man's determination to protect without using power, of a society reborn from its shame, of a teacher's battle for the children in her class becoming visible, and perhaps most importantly, the story of sincerity that didn't fit into any design. For Vanessa Klein, the world was now very different. Her sponsorships were gone, her business partners had sidelined her. The clip that spread after the gala night, showing her smiling and spilling wine on a woman, had been enough to destroy 20 years of reputation in her career. She tried to erase that moment, but the internet doesn't forget. Her name was no longer associated with a brand, but with a warning. Meanwhile, Emma spent her days writing a letter, not giving interviews. She posted it on the school bulletin board, to the students, parents, and fellow teachers. The letter said, "Sometimes you don't need to raise your voice. Sometimes, all you need to do is stand still. Your stance speaks louder than words. And if you've come somewhere with your heart, no one can silence you from there." That night, I wasn't the one who felt shame, because other people's smallness doesn't diminish your worth. Remember, children, sometimes the things that are unseen shine the brightest. That letter stayed on the school board for weeks. Then, other schools asked for it. Soon, educational foundations. In a way, Emma had unwittingly started a movement. A small scholarship program called Silent Grace was launched, a fund that provided books and stationery to low-income students, run solely on voluntary donations. Emma had been the inspiration, even without knowing the name. Daniel, throughout this process, was always behind her. But he never stood in front of her. He didn't try to replace her. He simply supported her decisions, her silence, her presence. And he would say, every chance he got, "As long as you remember who you are, the world can't make you forget." One day, Emma and Daniel went for a walk on the beach. The air was cold, but the sky was clear. Emma turned to the man beside her and asked, "Do you think people will remember me?" Daniel smiled. "I think people will remember not what you said, but how they felt. And that's more lasting than words." Emma lowered her head. The sound of the waves echoed between them. "I was just trying to do something for the kids," she said. "Just a little bit of books, a little bit of hope." Daniel stopped. He pulled out a small notebook from his coat pocket. It had an old date on it. "This is for you," he said. "It fell out of your school bag before the gala night." There was a note between the pages. Emma opened it to find a sentence in her own handwriting. "Maybe no one will notice, but I will still do the right thing." And now, that unnoticed thing had become a wave. Not a wave crashing on the shore, but a wave that flowed from deep within. That day on the beach, as the sun set, Emma realized it wasn't what she wore that night, who laughed, or who looked at her that mattered. It was what she silenced. She had silenced arrogance, rudeness, and most importantly, the voice of doubt within herself. And maybe that's why her dress was stained, but her story remained spotless. Her name was whispered, but its impact spread with a roar. She didn't shine with light, but everyone stayed in her light. If this story has affected you, if you've thought that sometimes silence can be as powerful as a shout, and if you believe that true grace is hidden in the stance, not in the decorations, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share this video, because every story could be the echo of another heart. And maybe one day, your story will be told here.